Good evening, sixth grade. How are you today? Now, today we will take page 32. Okay, Sadis? Page 32. Are you ready, sixth grade? Open your student book on page 32. Are you ready, Sadis? Write down. Yalla, Sadis. If you're ready, write down. Page 32. يلا تمام. Yeah, let's start sixth grade. Now, tell me sixth grade, who read the story? مين قرأها? Who read the story? Sixth grade. Who read this story? هدى? Bravo. Who else? Who read this story يا سادس? Who else غير هدى؟ طيب برافو سادس. طيب is it interesting story سادس? Is it interesting story? برافو. صحيح في كمان you can watch it. صحيح يا سادس. في عندك قصة like a film على شكل فيلم. يلا. Is it interesting يا هدى؟ برافو. It's very interesting. Right يا سادس. طيب what can you see in this picture? Sixth grade. What can you see in this picture? What can you see? يلا يا هيثم. What can you see in this picture? There are pair of shoes. Pair معناها زوج من. Pair of shoes. By English يا ميس. What do you mean by أقزام? البس. برافو. البس means أقزام أو بنحكي إحنا هون جني. جنيين. تمام يا سادس؟ We have two elves جنيان and pair of shoes وزوجين من الأحذية. Right, sixth grade? طيب. What can you see here? What can you see here? In the second picture, the second page. What can you see? يلا يا غرام. What can you see يا سادس? A man. He is a shoemaker. He is a shoemaker. What do you mean by shoemaker? سادس. Bravo, Faris. What do you mean by shoemaker? Shoemaker يا sixth grade. شو صانع أحذية. برافو زيد. طيب, and this is his wife. What do you mean by wife? His wife. This is a shoemaker صانع أحذية. برافو هدى. And his wife زوجته. تمام sixth grade? Yeah. Let's start. Read and point with me. تبع معي السادس. تمام? Our title is The Shoemaker and Tiny Elves. Again, The Shoemaker and the Tiny Elves. حكينا shoemaker means صانع أحذية. And the tiny elves. What do you mean by tiny? سادس. Tiny elves. يلا sixth grade. Tiny, very small. برافو هدى. Or extremely small. And elves حكينا جني. خلينا نحكيها جني فارس. تمام؟ برافو. جني elves means جني. تمام. Let's read. Point with me. سادس. Once upon a time, there was an honest shoemaker who was very poor. Once upon a time, there was an honest. What do you mean by honest, Sadis? Honest shoemaker. Honest. Honest. صادق. Bravo Yara. Huda. Excellent. So, there was an honest shoemaker. عندي shoemaker. He was very honest. صادق جدا. Who was very poor. He was very poor. فقير جدا. Bravo زيد. Again, once upon a time, there was an honest shoemaker who was very poor. كان صادق وفقير جدا. تمام. Let's complete. He worked as hard as he could. He worked as hard as he could. كان يعمل. He worked as hard بتعب. برافو. أو بشكل شاق جدا. برافو. As he could. تمام سادس. And still he couldn't earn enough to keep himself and his wife. Earn, what do you mean by earn? حكينا إنه he worked as hard as he could. بيشتغل قدر المستطاع. But he still couldn't earn. برافو. Earn معناها يكسب. Write with me. 6th grade. يكسب أو كسب. He couldn't earn enough to keep himself and his wife. ما بيستطيع كسب الكثير من المال to keep himself and his wife. ليعيش himself and his wife. ليعيش هو وزوجته. تمام يا سادس؟ برافو. خلينا نشوف المينينجز again. حكينا what do you mean by shoemaker؟ سادس shoemaker. التايتل the shoemaker and the tiny elves صانع أحذية. برافو. shoemaker tiny 6th grade. tiny elves. برافو. tiny very small or extremely small صغير جدا. حكينا elves يا سادس جني. برافو. or جان بالعربي الفصحى. جني. حكينا he was an honest shoemaker. What do you mean by honest؟ يارا excellent. برافو. يوسف safe excellent يا زيد. فارس honest. The shoemaker was an honest person. كان شخص صادق. طيب حكينا يا سادس he worked as hard as he could but he couldn't earn. What do you mean by earn؟ لا لسه ما وصلنا لبعدها. مرام earn he couldn't earn. برافو يا لين. يكسب he couldn't earn enough to keep himself and his wife. للعيش هو وزوجته. تمام 6th grade؟ تمام لهون؟ Do you understand the first paragraph؟ شو سادس؟ This is the first paragraph. Do you have any question؟ تمام. يلا. The second paragraph number 2. يلا. Point with me 6th grade. At last, there came a day when he had nothing left but one piece of leather. Again, at last حكينا means بالماضي. At last بالماضي. There came a day when he had nothing left. ما عنده إشي يعمله. nothing left. تمام يا سادس. But one piece of leather. What do you mean by leather؟ سادس. By English. يلا يا سادس. 6th grade. leather. What do you mean by leather؟ حكينا إنه came a day when he had nothing left. ما عنده أي شيء. But one piece of leather. What do you mean by leather؟ قطعة من الجلد. leather means جلد. leather means جلد. تمام سادس؟ طيب big enough to make one pair of shoes. big enough طبعا هي كانت كبيرة to make one pair of shoes. What do you mean one pair of shoes or pair of shoes؟ سادس زوج من الأحذية. برافو يا زيد. excellent لين. لا one pair of زوج من الأحذية. So he had one piece of leather. عنده قطعة من الجلد big enough to make one pair of shoes. كفاية فقط إنها تصنع one pair of shoes. زوجين من الأحذية. تمام يا سادس؟ تمام؟ طيب let's complete. He cut out the shoes. عندي قطع الليذر to make one pair of shoes. قطع الليذر الجلد ليصنع pair of shoes. Ready to stitch. What do you mean by stitch 6th grade؟ stitch هو cut out the shoes قطعها على شكل shoes and ready to stitch. برافو يارا. stitch. What do you mean by stitch؟ فارس غرزة. اوكي يا سادس. stitch معناها غرزة. إذا هو first of all he cut out the shoes. قطع الليذر to make pair of shoes ليصنع زوج من الأحذية and ready to stitch. بس كانت جاهزة إنه يعمل فيها غرزة or sewing خياطة. تمام يا سادس؟ and left them on the bench. What do you mean by bench؟ تيجي يخيط. تمام فارس صح. غرزة أو يخيط لأنه piece of leather جلد. تمام. yes stitcher yes sewing خياطة أو غرزة. طيب حكينا and left them on the bench. What do you mean by bench يا سادس؟ safe. What do you mean by bench؟ برافو هدى. يارا مقعد. bench means مقعد. إذا first of all he cut out the leather. قطعها to make pair of shoes ليصنع زوج من الأحذية and ready to stitch وخلاها جاهزة to stitch. سيف خلاص بكفي comments. جاهزة ليصنع stitch غرزة and left them on the bench. تركها على المقعد. لهون تمام 6th grade. طيب then he said his prayers. He said his prayers. What do you mean by pray? Prayers. سادس. Then he said his prayers. يلا سادس. لا prayers. said قال pray يصلي. prayers قال ايش او حكى ادعيته دعاءه. سادس. دعاءه ماشي او الادعية. He said his prayers. حكى ادعيته and went to bed. وذهب للنوم. ايش يا رؤى؟ What do you want? طيب again let's complete this. برافو ريماس. دعاءه. He said his prayers. حكى أدعيته and went to bed. ذهب للنوم. برافو. يلا let's complete سادس. Trusting that he could finish the shoes the next day and sell them. طبعا trusting. What do you mean by trusting يا رؤى؟ هلا بعيد يا أيمن. What do you mean by trusting؟ trusting كان كله ثقة. برافو يارا. trusting that he could finish the shoes. كان عنده ثقة إنه ينهي الشوز and next day sell them. sell them يبيعها. sell يبيع. تمام سادس. أيمن let's start again. يلا أيمن ركز معي. حكينا once upon a time there was an honest shoemaker. كان عندي في صادق صانع أحذية صادق. تمام. honest shoemaker who was very poor. كان فقير جدا. he worked as hard as he could. he worked very hard. كان يعمل بشكل جد أو بشكل متعب. and still he couldn't earn. مع إنه كان يعمل بشكل متعب but he couldn't earn. لم يستطع كسب enough to keep himself and his wife. لم يكسب الكثير للعيش هو وزوجته. يكسب. برافو. طيب حكينا يا أيمن second paragraph. At last بالماضي there came a day when he had nothing left. ما كان عنده أي شيء but one piece of leather. one piece of leather. حكينا leather means جلد أو قطعة من الجلد. تمام يا أيمن. big enough to make one pair of shoes. كانت كفاية أو كافية to make pair of shoes. زوجين من الأحذية. he cut out the shoes. cut يا أيمن means قطعها and ready to stitch. حكينا stitch means يا سادس. برافو. غرزة. and left them on the bench. خلاهم على المقعد. تمام يا سادس. when he said his prayers. حكينا said his prayers. يلا يا 6th grade. what do you mean by his prayers? said his prayers. حكى أدعيته أو دعاءه and went to bed. ذهب للنوم. طيب trusting that he could finish the shoes the next day and sell them. كان على ثقة. what do you mean by trusting? excellent. he could finish the shoes إنه ينهي عملها and next day can sell them. يستطيع بيعها. تمام سادس. let's see our meanings. نكمل. حكينا leather. what do you mean by leather? he has a big piece of leather. leather means برافو قطعة من الجلد. طيب حكينا pair of shoes. what do you mean pair of? pair برافو يا سادس. زوج من الأحذية. يلا حكينا he couldn't earn enough to keep himself and his wife. what do you mean by wife? wife يا سادس. wife. he couldn't earn enough money to keep himself and his wife. برافو زوجته. طيب حكينا he cut out the shoes. قطعها وجهز الليدر الجلد and ready to stitch. what do you mean by stitch يا سادس? what do you mean by stitch? برافو جاهزة للغرزة stitcher or sewing الخياطة. and left them on the bench. what do you mean by bench? تركها على البنش مقعد chair like a chair. تمام سادس. طيب يلا let's complete paragraph number 3. يلا يا سادس. The last paragraph today. بكفي اليوم لباراجراف نمبر 3. يلا point with me. تبع معي. يلا سادس. Are you ready? Paragraph 3. يلا تمام. يلا. Early in the next morning, he rose went to his workbench and discovered there a pair of shoes. Early طبعا نعرف كلنا انها مبكرا. يلا يا رؤى عدت هلا قبل شوي رؤى. هلا عدت كل الباراجرافز. Paragraph number 1 and the second one. طيب early مبكرا in the next morning في الصباح المقبل he rose. What do you mean by rose? rise, raise, rose. لا ما بيجي معناها ارتفع. get up. برافو. نهض. went to his workbench وذهب. he went to his workbench إلى المقعد. تمام يا سادس. and discovered. What do you mean by discovered يا سادس؟ يلا discovered. paragraph number 3 رماس. and he discovered اكتشف. تمام. there a pair of shoes. اكتشف انه في عنده on the bench pair of shoes. كان في زوجين من الأحذية. هو شو كان حاط على المقعد يا سادس؟ شو كان حاط؟ the big piece of leather. كان عنده على المقعد قطعة جلد كبيرة. ready to stitch. جاهزة للغرزة. صح؟ but in the next morning الصباح التالي he discovered there a pair of shoes. اكتشف انه في pair of shoes. زوجين الأحذية جاهزين. they are ready. تمام؟ يس لا زين. اكتشف discovered there a pair of shoes. زوجين من الأحذية جاهزين تماما. تمام؟ برافو. يلا. beautifully made. beautifully made مصنوعين بشكل جميل. يعني جاهزين. they are already. تمام يا سادس؟ طيب. the leather was gone. the leather was gone. قطعة الجلد اختفت. تمام يا زيد. برافو. the leather was gone and there was no sign of anyone there. There was no sign. What do you mean by sign? Excellent هدى. Who else? برافو أحمد. No sign. لا يوجد علامة or إشارة of anyone there. ما في عنده إشارة إنه كان في حدا هون. تمام يا سادس؟ Sign means إشارة. طيب let's complete. The shoemaker and his wife didn't know what to make of it. The shoemaker and his wife زوجته didn't know what to make. مش عارفين شو يعملوا. They didn't know what to make. Then the first customer. What do you mean by customer يا سادس؟ Customer. The first customer who buy something. What do you mean by برافو سادس. زيد. سامي. مرام. زبون. مش نحكي عن الزبون. Customer. Who came was so pleased. What do you mean by pleased? The customer حكينا. Who came was so pleased. مسرور. برافو سادس. كان مسرور with the beautiful shoes that he bought them. مسرور جدا with the beautiful shoes من الأحذية الجميلة that he bought them. تمام يا سادس لهون؟ Yeah. And paid so much. What do you mean by paid? Paid. And paid so much. دفع. برافو يا زيد. دفع so much الكثير من الموني. And paid so much that the shoemaker was able to buy leather enough for 2 pairs. إذا he paid so much money. دفع الكثير من المال. So much that the shoemaker was able. What do you mean by able يا سادس? What do you mean by able? قادر على able to buy leather enough. قادر على شراء الليذر كمان قطعة جلد for 2 pairs. ليصنع كمان زوجين من الأحذية. تمام يا سادس لهون؟ يلا يا سادس. Let's read our meanings. حكينا raise ينهض. rose past simple بالتصريف التالي. What do you mean الثاني? What do you mean by rose? نهض. excellent. get up ينهض. get up or wake up. طيب customer. customer. What do you mean by customer حكينا؟ زبون. excellent. pleased. The customer was so pleased. كان مسرور جدا. تمام. كان مسرور جدا. خلينا نعيد الباراجراف 3 باراجرافز باي كويكلي على السريع. يلا يا سادس. حكينا انه الشو ميكر. what do you mean by show maker and tiny Elvis؟ يلا بسرعة السادس. what do you mean by show maker and tiny Elvis؟ shoemaker. what do you mean by shoemaker؟ صانع أحذية. برافو. tiny Elvis. tiny very small or extremely small and Elvis حكينا means جني تمام or جام. تمام يا سادس؟ لهون do you have any question سادس؟ do you have any question؟ يلا سادس do you have any question يا سادس؟ is it clear لهون؟ يلا رؤى do you understand this story رؤى؟ معنا الفقرة الثالثة حكيناها سادس. ما حكينا غير pleased. حكينا مسرور سادس. customer زبون أو زبون. والروز الباست simple أو الverb to for raise ينهض. get up معناها ينهض. هاي هي معاني الباراجراف 3 سادس. Do you have any questions 6th grade؟ يلا. تمام لهون؟ تمام؟ طيب. مين حكى لي بده معنا الثالث؟ تمام. سادس let's complete tomorrow إن شاء الله. بنكمل هون.
بدك تكمل الحصة؟
عادي ولا لا؟
حطي بلس. أيوة.
هون؟
أيوة.
كمل هيك بضل شوي.
خلص اكتبي إكس.
خلاص؟
يلا كمل.
أكمل. سادس خلينا نكمل على السريع بس نحكي على السريع اللي ما فهم. سامعيني هلا سادس؟ Can you hear me؟ طيب خلينا نعيد على السريع. رؤى سألت ومش عارف مين كمان. حكينا the shoemaker صانع أحذية shoemaker and tiny Elvis. tiny means صغير جدا والإلفيس means جني or جان. طيب خلينا نعيدها على السريع. once upon a time there was an honest shoemaker. كان في عندي honest shoemaker معناها honest. what do you mean by honest؟ يلا يا سادس. صادق. تمام. he was very poor. كان فقير جدا. he worked as hard as he could. كان يعمل بشكل جدي. and still he couldn't earn. what do you mean by earn يا سادس؟ حكينا يكسب. he worked as hard as he could but he still couldn't earn enough to keep himself and his wife. إنه يعيش نفسه and his wife مرته. تمام أو زوجته. يلا paragraph number 2 يا لؤى. point with me لؤى. at last there came a day when he had nothing left. when he had nothing حكينا ما كان عنده أي شيء but one piece of leather. what do you mean by leather يا سادس؟ قطعة جلد. تمام. big enough to make one pair of shoes. pair of حكينا. what do you mean by pair of؟ pair of يلا زوج من. pair of shoes. he cut them جهزهم and put them on the bench. تركهم على المقعد. ready to stitch جاهزين للخياطة فقط. تمام يا سادس؟ طيب. then he said his prayers. حكى prayers. what do you mean by prayers؟ حكينا. يلا يا سادس. حكى أدعيته. حكى الأدعية and went to the bed وذهب للنوم. طبعا كان عنده trust big trust that he could finish the shoes and the next day sell them. كان عنده ثقة كبيرة إنه make the shoes يصنعها and sell them يبيعها. early طبعا باكرا in the next morning he rose. what do you mean by rose؟ rose نهض get up went to his workbench وذهب لمقعده اللي بيشتغل عليه and discovered there a pair of shoes. اكتشف there are pair of shoes. تمام. beautifully made طبعا مصنوعين بشكل جميل. beautifully made. the leather was gone. the leather was gone. what do you mean by leather was gone يا سادس؟ اختفت. تمام ريماس برافو يا ريماس. was gone and there was no sign no sign anyone there. ما كان في عندي أي إشارة. تمام. The shoemaker and his wife didn't know what to make. ما كانوا عارفين شو يعملوا. Then the first customer. What do you mean by customer يا سادس؟ يلا عشان ما فيهم يفهم. Customer. برافو. That he bought them and paid so much. دفع كثيرا. That the shoemaker was able to buy another leather. قادر على إنه يشتري another leather to make two pairs of shoes. تمام يا سادس؟ خلاص؟ بعطيكم المينينجز إن شاء الله باي واتساب. لهون تمام؟ تمام سادس. Thank you for being an active. See you tomorrow إن شاء الله. باي باي سادس.